Hello, my fellow warriors. Welcome to the Warrior Insights channel, where today's topic of discussion is the degradation of a city, the New York City social experiment gone awry. Before I begin, I'd like to remind you that this article may be found at athenaangelique.substack.com. I wrote this article through the eyes of a retired law enforcement officer with nearly 10 years of experience dealing with people from all walks of life, and sometimes people go awry, just like the cities have gone awry. And so I've dealt with criminals, drug addicts, homeless, and normal, average citizens that just want better for their community. In addition, I wrote this through the eyes of somebody who's seen medical emergencies, who's revived people with naloxone, aka Narcan, and brought them back to life. I have over 300 hours of drug training and drug-specific experience, where I can identify drugs and the people who are on them and the effects on the human body and the effects on society. So keep that in mind of my background experience when we go through this article. In addition, I wrote about New York City specifically because I am a former New York City resident, but this is also happening in cities across the United States, to include Portland, Chicago, Seattle, where these policies have been put into place to fulfill a certain agenda and to be soft on crime and drug use and all sorts of things that go with these liberal type policies. So going into this article, that being said, I reviewed what worked for New York City and what isn't working for New York City now. Back when Mayor Dinkins was in power, around 1990 to 1993, New York City was a disaster. There was prostitution, drug use. Nobody wanted to walk around in the streets. There's lots of crime, and the city generally wasn't safe. Then Mayor Rudy Giuliani came into power, and he instituted 5 pillars that turned the city around. I personally experienced a New York City that I could walk around after going out to the club, like the famous Sound Factory, the Limelight, and not have any issues whatsoever. I felt safe, the city was clean, and the city was prosperous and thriving. Everybody wanted to go there, including myself. I went there as a teenager, I went there in high school, and I felt very safe in New York City. So what were Mayor Giuliani's 5 pillars? Well, he focused on crime reduction by addressing minor offenses and disorderly behavior to prevent more serious crimes. He wanted to nip it in the bud before it got any worse. Then he instituted police reforms by implementing community policing, improving police-community relations, and using data analysis to target resources effectively. He had tough on crime policies with the 3 strikes law, which imposed longer sentences for repeat offenders. Then he focused on economic development. He wanted to revitalize the city's economy by attracting businesses, promoting tourism, and supporting financial sectors. Then he focused on social programs. He addressed the underlying social issues, like initiatives to combat drug addiction, including expanded drug treatment programs and support for individuals seeking rehab. So what happened to New York City? Why is it in its current state? Well, basically, the leadership after Giuliani focused on everything opposite of what he established. Minor offenses are treated as cashless bail offenses. In 2019, a cashless bail system was introduced. Why? Because critics of New York's old bail laws argued that they penalized poverty, creating a 2-tiered criminal justice system in which the wealthy can post bail while they await trial, and the poor will just have to sit and rot in jail until they can await trial. So cash bail is prohibited for most misdemeanors and non-violent felonies. They can release people with the least restrictive conditions. Basically, you go in, you get processed, and you can just walk right out the door before the ink on the paper is even dry. Basically, there's no real penalty for committing the crime. You just get processed and out you go. There's no real major thing keeping you in the court system, making sure that you return for your actual trial. Judges have discretion over how to use an arsenal of tools to make sure the defendant returns to court, such as setting bail, electronic monitoring, and surrendering passports or treatment programs. But the very first year the New York's bail policies took effect, nearly a fifth of all defendants were rearrested for a crime of any kind. And 2% of the total led to a rearrest for a violent felony. The rate of recidivism due to cashless bail policies, well, it grew from 61.9% to 72.4% under bail reform. Rearrest rates for released defendants with any pending cases swelled from 62.8 to 68.8. Then we go in and look again under some bail reform, what happened. 79% of defendants with a pending case or prior conviction. For residential burglaries, the rearrest rate is 62%. Commercial burglary is 70%, grand larceny 70%, robbery third degree 70%. It's not working. People are going out and doing the crime. And it kind of also, in addition, it stems from a lack of capture and a lack of prosecution. Several weeks ago, I wrote an article about shoplifting and how it starts from the corporate level and goes all the way through whether the state attorney chooses to prosecute the crime or not. And if the state attorney isn't going to go forward with the prosecution for the crime, it's just going to keep happening. Then we look at law enforcement. Are they being supported when they want to enforce the law? Well, in the wake of the defund the police movement, city leadership looking to gain social credit score points with organizations such as Black Lives Matter, and combined with deteriorating work conditions, LAPD officers have had enough. As you can see from this chart here, the resignations projected for the full year is 1,400, retirements 1,572, and total attrition 3,006 officers. NYPD cops are being forced to work an inhumane amount of overtime due to worker shortage. Precincts barely have enough personnel to meet the minimum required safety to answer 911 calls. And the New York pension, which was always like the golden exit, isn't enough to keep them around anymore. They're bailing because of what they consider anti-cop policies, woke bail reform policies that make criminal justice a revolving door, and low wages. We're losing cops to better pay and benefits and other policing jobs almost every day. Would you want to be an NYPD police officer if you knew your work was a waste of time, that you would be subjected to working massive amounts of overtime for a starting salary of $55,190, and after 5.5 back-breaking years, $117,510? Well, I used a tax calculator, and I found out that base salary is really worth $40,551 to live in New York City, or even the surrounding areas. Could you live off of $40,551? Well, the average cost for a single person without assistance is $54,000. But hey, if you're frugal with your expenses and living in New York City, a $50,000 salary is possible. Well, after taxes, it looks like you have a $9,400 and something shortage. Well, I may not be a mathematician, but it doesn't look very good. Would you want to work under such conditions for the NYPD? I doubt it. All right, now we're going to look at economic development. As we saw, Giuliani invested in economic development. It used to be a thriving powerhouse with office towers, restaurants, bars, and clubs, Broadway shows in Times Square, the hustle and bustle of commuters and tourists alike. But what happened? Well, partially the lockdowns happened, which basically shuttered 5,200 businesses by the last 3 months of 2021. These were the effects of the shutdown and the mandates that were imposed on the city. Jobs in New York City fell by approximately 295,000, and several thousand of those workers because of mandates for them to take an experimental medication to keep their job. Then the city experienced a $12 billion loss due to remote work. The workers coming into Manhattan are spending $12.4 billion less per year than they were before the pandemic. Why? They don't have to commute to those office towers anymore. They're working from home. So if they're not commuting to the office towers, they're not spending money for lunches, they're not going out to bars and restaurants after work. They have no reason to go and fight the traffic to get to New York City or ride the train that's packed with a bunch of people to get to an office anymore. People are working comfortably from home without having to worry about the commute to New York City every day. That led to office occupancy rates falling. They fell 16.1% in the first 3 months of 2023, which means some 76 million square feet of office space is empty. This is the lowest amount since early 2021. But the situation isn't going to improve anytime soon. Companies are wrestling with their space needs as they continue to sort out how many employees will be in office each day. And then 14 million square feet of modern office space is under construction, so it will lure tenants from older buildings. According to Investopedia, office vacancies in downtown Manhattan are 22.6% in quarter one of 2023, compared to 10.6% in 2020. So, taking into account the office space, some people say, well, can't we just convert these office spaces into apartments for the homeless or the migrants? Well, not really. And here's why. There are structural design considerations. These office buildings have large open floor plans, and you would have to remove or replace structural elements such as load-bearing walls, which may not align with residential apartment layouts, requiring significant modification. Building codes and regulations for commercial office space vary widely and are very different from residential regulations. You have to meet safety standards including fire codes, soundproofing, and ventilation systems. Then, most residential buildings require amenities and services such as parking facilities, recreational spaces, common areas, and utilities that are not common with office building spaces. Then we have noise and privacy concerns. There's not enough soundproofing in these commercial office buildings. Then you have infrastructure and utilities such as plumbing, electrical systems, and HVAC, which require significant upgrades. Zoning and land use restrictions. So basically, you're looking at extensive renovations and substantial investment into these older office buildings to make them even viable for residential use. But who's going to pay? Well, private firms aren't going to pay. These commercial office buildings are bleeding. They don't have tenants. They're not going to retrofit or create these apartments if they're not making money already. The New York City's budget is bleeding. The city's revenue stream is projected to fall this year. And then there's a budget gap in 2026 predicted of nearly $10 billion. So New York City can't afford to retrofit or create these buildings that make them suitable for homeless or migrants. Now we're going to look at social programs. Just like Giuliani, he focused on the cause of the social issues. But New York City, the current mayor, is not focusing on the cause. He's just focusing on the after effects. So how is New York City combating drug addiction, homelessness, and massive migration? Well, I'm going to look at the drug part first. Well, in news this week, New York City's drug-themed vending machine cleaned out of crack pipes overnight. They should restock. A New York Post headline read on June 6th. They have vending machines now to deal drug smoking kits complete with pipes, mouthpieces, and lip balm, the overdose reversing drug Narcan, fentanyl detecting strips, as well as various odd items such as condoms, tampons, and nicotine gum. These machines cost $11,000, and that's before stocking them with the aforementioned equipment. And the vending machine was stocked in the morning. It was gone, completely empty by midday. Do you think this is sustainable? All they have to do is punch in a zip code, and they get these items for free. According to a city councilwoman, she stated, "Our city should not be commodifying addiction, and anyone supporting these vending machines should be ashamed of themselves. The money the health department is spending on these machines, which are providing, among other things, free crack pipes to drug-addicted individuals, should be spent on rehabilitation and social services to actually help addicts rather than on items like these, which only encourage their addiction. I'm going to go into my experience now as a law enforcement officer with drug addiction. By providing Narcan or naloxone, it will only be effective if the person uses with another person. They cannot Narcan themselves if they die of an overdose. They can't bring themselves back. They have to use with a partner and hope that that partner is not only coherent enough, but willing and able to provide that Narcan to the user should they die of an overdose. Now, it's a double-edged sword because let's say you do have a partner that will administer the Narcan for you if you do overdose. There's a fine line between being high and on the nod, which is a normal description of people who are high, versus people who are dead, cardiac arrest, unresponsive. If a person administers Narcan to somebody who's not dead and is high, they're going to kill their high, and that person is going to be mad at their partner for killing their high. But if the partner waits too long, it's going to result in that person's death. So what are you going to do? Most people may not get involved at all. And in addition, let's say you have a partner, they Narcan you, they bring you back to life. Do you think that that makes that user never want to use again? 99.9% of the time, the user will be revived, they'll be fine, and several hours later, they'll use again because it is a never-ending cycle. Someone who is addicted to heroin or fentanyl or a mix thereof is in a perpetual cycle to get the drug. They don't want to be dope sick. They don't want to withdraw. It's not about getting high anymore, okay? It's about not getting sick. And so the users will continue to use whether you Narcan them 3 times in one day and bring them back from life or they die. And unfortunately, a lot of these users want to die because it ends the never-ending cycle for them. Because as soon as they get up, they're looking for the drug to not be sick. And they spend their entire day planned around getting money for the drug, using the drug, being in a drugged stupor, and repeating over and over and over, day in, day out, 24/7, 365. It is a never-ending cycle for them. It is painful. Some may want to quit, but this drug has a very strong vice grip. And unless somebody has an iron will to go to rehab, they will not succeed in getting off this drug or the combination of drugs. Now I'm going to talk about the fentanyl test kits. These machines supposedly have test kits for fentanyl. I will say to test fentanyl in general is a very dangerous procedure. 3 milligrams, equivalent to several granules of sand, is enough to kill somebody if it becomes airborne or absorbed on the skin. Of course, this is a non-tolerant person, but I will tell you that to be exposed to fentanyl in the first place, you're gambling. And any person, user or otherwise, law enforcement should assume that every drug contains fentanyl. Even marijuana, because they can liquefy it and spray it on the marijuana. Fentanyl is extremely potent and powerful. And so to encourage users to test the fentanyl is dangerous in its own effect. But also if you want to think about The fentanyl test kits do not tell you the amount of fentanyl that's in it. It will just show positive or negative. And so you don't know if you're going to get 3 milligrams or 20 milligrams. Because what happens is when these manufacturers, let's say, of fentanyl-based products, it could be a fake Xanax, a fake pill, all they're doing is combining the fentanyl with a base or a powder in a blender. And once those 2 or 3 or 4 ingredients are mixed together, they have zero control of the amount of fentanyl that each pill or packet receives. It's blended with weakened other substances or pressed together with other substances, such as pill binders. So you never know what you're going to get. So messing around with fentanyl test kits, it's really honestly pointless. I would just say, assume that every drug that you find on the street has some fentanyl in it, because I would say 90% of the drugs that I tested on the street were positive for fentanyl in some respects. Let's talk about the cost of these test kits. It's about $50 each. For the naloxone, it's $22 to $60 for those kits. So that's not including any of these other items in this $11,000 vending machine. And it's running out in a few hours. So then we go to the crack pipes. Well, why provide crack pipes? Now, I can almost understand the needle exchange program to curb the spread of disease and cellulitis and other illnesses and ailments from intravenous drug use, but crack pipes? Why? Basically, whenever somebody smokes crack through a pipe or whatever device they choose to use, it's sterilized through the flame. So again, that's just, there's no life-saving disease or curbing benefit from the distribution of crack pipes and lip balm. Moving on, we're going to talk about homelessness. Homelessness in New York City has reached the highest level since the Great Depression of the 1930s. In December of 2022, there were 68,884 homeless people. And over the course of the year, 102,656 different homeless adults and children slept in New York City Department of Health Homeless Services shelter systems. The number of homeless New Yorkers sleeping each night in shelters is now 39% higher than it was 10 years ago. And the number of homeless single adults is 112% higher than it was 10 years ago. It talks about the primary causes of homelessness is lack of affordable housing and eviction, domestic violence, job loss, and hazardous housing conditions. But I would like to focus on there's higher rates of serious mental illness, addiction disorders, and other severe health problems with the homeless. And if you put them in hotels mixed with normal tourists and citizens, you are going to have a major problem. Here's a chart of the number of homeless people sleeping each night in shelters. As you can see, it's a lot higher than it was. And now I'm going to focus on the migrants. More than 67,000 migrants have arrived in New York City since the crisis began. 41,500 people are currently being cared for by the city. 41,500 people, in addition to the 68,884 homeless people. You have over 100,000 people in New York City, either homeless or migrants. The city has spent $1 billion addressing this issue so far, and it may have cost as much as $4.3 billion through June of 2024 to house and handle the migrant population that has been allowed in the sanctuary city of New York. They advertised themselves as a sanctuary city, and so people came. They accepted them, and they're asking for $350 million in federal aid, but will receive about $30 million. And they're using hotels, gyms, schools, and more to house the migrant population. Feed them, take care of them. This is your tax dollars, our tax dollars. And the city cannot afford it. I just mentioned that they're pretty much bankrupt, and the strain of the homeless and the migrants is going to break the city if it's not broken already. So if you look at Giuliani's policies, we could see that the current administration has basically done the anti of everything that Giuliani had done to clean up the city, because of this agenda that is being pushed to be soft on crime, to be soft on immigration, to care for the homeless, but in the wrong way. Let's learn and understand the following: the results of the soft on crime policies and a cashless bail system, the results of a defunded, overworked, disrespected, and understaffed police department, the nature of drug addiction and drug abuse, which cannot be solved by throwing free crack pipes, naloxone, and test kits into vending machines, and the results of an open border and sanctuary city policy. This is the result of a social experiment gone awry. It's happening in New York City, it's happening in Portland, it's happening in Seattle, and it's happening in Chicago, it's happening in San Francisco, it's happening in all these cities that have these policies. What can you do about it? Vote these politicians out of office who support these policies. Understand that these policies don't work. Let your voice be heard. If your business, school, or livelihood is being affected by these policies at board meetings and public commentary. And lastly, if you're able to, vote with your boots and your wallet. Do not live in or patronize cities that cannot provide a safe and healthy atmosphere for you and your family. I hate to say it. I'm a former New York City resident. Like I said, it's sad to see a city which was one of the best cities in the entire world. And I've been to London, Berlin, Munich, Paris, Rome. I've been all over the world. And New York City was one of the greatest cities that I ever knew. But it's gone. There's no way to bring it back unless we address the root cause of the problem, those 5 pillars that Mayor Giuliani put into place. Now, I'm no fan of any politician, don't get me wrong, but I will say we can learn from what works and what doesn't work. These soft policies do not work. The liberal policies do not work. These bleeding heart liberal policies do not work. And I know that they're trying to degrade these cities. I know they want people into poverty because it forces people to rely more on government assistance. And the more you rely on government assistance, government handouts, the more migrants you insert into a population, the more homelessness and desperation you insert into a population, the more control the government will take. Your cities will turn into trash. We have to stand up against these policies. We have to fight for what is right. Humane, but what is right. Our citizens first. Americans first. Our cities first. Before we take care of... We got to close the border. And we have to institute policies that are strict on crime. We have to stop it. You and I see it every day on social media. Mobs going into luxury stores, looting, robbing them, the loss prevention is just standing there, doing nothing. And even if loss prevention puts hands on and grabs them, the prosecution end is failing the community. The cashless bail system is a revolving door, and it's just, the whole situation is very bad. So, protect yourself, stay informed, stay vigilant, understand what is going on, and until next time, ever forward.